we're just wrapping up this diversity panel, but I thought I'd ask Heidi a question since she was one of the first female venture capitalists in the world. Heidi, how has that journey been?
Long. Look, I mean, I was very fortunate in that I had a great mentor, Ann Winblad, who was a VC, became a VC 10 years before I did. So I was super lucky to have been an entrepreneur backed by a female investor and a former CEO herself. And I continue to be so thrilled to see the successes and improvements that we're making both in the venture capital industry and, more importantly, of dual importance, in all the female entrepreneurs that we're seeing in funding.
Well, I think that's some great perspective there. Lila, we're wrapping up a diversity panel here, but since you're already on here, like you are a great example of like a female leader as deputy CTO of Microsoft, and you've helped so many people grow, including myself. So thank you so much for that. And would you like to share a perspective on what's it like to be like a female in like the hardcore technology field as like the deputy CTO and also an immigrant, right?
Yeah, look, I have a very positive and optimistic point of view. I think the most amazing part about our brain, which we try to model with AI now, is that we're constantly changing, constantly growing. And we're making, like Heidi was just saying, is we're making strides. And this is not a binary situation. We're going to have to keep working at it. And we're going to have to keep getting better. And we're going to have to keep improving ourselves in terms of being more inclusive and listening to others, continuing to do that. And one step at a time, we will get to the destination that we're envisioning for ourselves. So this is one of the very, very few places in the world where you can be an immigrant, but you can be very, very different from everybody else and still be successful. So I have very high hopes for where we're going over time.
Oh, thank you for that. Well, I'm going to wrap up this diversity panel, and then I'm going to move forward with Heidi and Lila, where we're going to do a separate panel altogether. But thank you so much for all our diversity panelists for being here and sharing your perspectives. This was a really powerful moment for us, and we are so thankful to you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Aku. Thank you, Annie.
And Lila, stay on the call, and we will continue with our other panel. The rest of you, I'm going to share the attendee link with y'all. I hope y'all have it. Feel free to listen in on the next panel. Hey, thank you so much for making it. I'm so excited to bring both of you together. I know y'all go way back in time too, so I think this is the perfect panel. I wanted to bring you together and reunite you here. So
I know, I'm so excited because I'm such a huge fan of Lila's, and so it's so fun.
Oh my God, I'm a bigger fan of you, Heidi, and you've helped me so much along the way. So good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
In a long time.
Well, this is so exciting. This is, two amazing female leaders who completely motivate and inspire me. And I'm just gonna start this by introducing both of you to the audience here. And a lot of the people in our audience are female founders or founders of color, and there are also a lot of venture-backed founders who are trying to take their company from 0 to IPO. So I think this is an interesting topic, especially because both of you have done this before and have taken these companies to become the rocket ships that they are today. So it's a really interesting perspective here. To introduce Lila here. Lila is one of my favorite female leaders in technology and AI, and she's just such a good person. The first time I met Lila, I was like, okay, this person is just so down to earth and so sweet and so genuine, in spite of the success that you've attained. So I just really like just as a person, like she's one of my favorite. So I'm really excited. And Lila is currently the deputy CTO of Microsoft. She's the CVP there, reporting into like the leadership, like Kevin Scott. And she has been leading Microsoft's technology initiatives. And she's been doing a great work also with COVID, with her nonprofits, fight against COVID. And she's just such a great good person, just such a good human being. So I'm so excited. And Lila has a really, you know, like rock star story about how she came here as like an immigrant, and she worked her way through school. She like, you know, did all this hard work, worked her way through school, and now look where she is. Like, and she did this all like as an immigrant. So it's so inspiring for people like me as well, who, you know, I'm also from India, so also an immigrant, and I also have a Russian connection because, like, kind of like my parents were in Moscow before I was born, like growing up. So just really excited to have you here. And I have Heidi here. Heidi is like, everybody knows Heidi. Like she is like one of the first female venture capitalists in like the entire world. And she has set an example for so many of us who have got into the field of venture or are looking to get into the field of venture capital. So Heidi, I mean, Heidi is also someone who's like very passionate about helping women get into venture and very passionate about helping female founders succeed, and has been like a voice throughout like the Valley for everybody in terms of supporting women. And, you know, and today because of Heidi, like so many venture funds have gone on and hired female partners. In fact, the year 2019 was a year where so many like people were promoted to partner at venture funds. And thanks to that, like I have so many friends at venture funds like Kelly Chen at Data Collective and so many other people. So I'm so excited to reopen this moment, and we're just going to keep this a little bit more informal and fireside chat. Like I know both of you have a lot of like common old things to talk about in terms of just catching up, so wanted to just keep it informal here. So no hard or fast questions, but I'm just gonna like pop up some questions based on like your career success and as a female leader, how your journey has been. And then we'll like kind of deep dive into like zero to IPO if you want to talk about specific startups that you've taken from the early stage to the growth stage. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Cool. Let's like start this then. So I'm like gonna start with Heidi here. Like Heidi, I just love to like you know, understand, and I'm sure many people in the audience would love to just learn about your story, like how you got into venture capital. And I know you shared a little bit about Anne Winblad, who's been like a great mentor to you. So I'd just love to learn about how this happened and how you are, you know, came to where you are today.
Sure. Long story short, and I think it's fun because Lila and I have very different backgrounds in this regard. She is super deep tech, and I actually was an English major in college, and really my love of technology was as a user. You know, I've been around a long time, so when I first touched a personal computer, I said, "Oh my God, this is the future, and this is going to unlock the world for me." And more as a user than a technologist. So I went to business school, and out of business school, or while I was in business school, my brother, who's a brilliant programmer, wrote an early spreadsheet, and we decided to start a company together. And I did that for 14 years and ultimately sold that company, raised 2 rounds of VC, had a successful at the time outcome. Much smaller than today's standards, but good back in the day. And then I joined Apple for a year. I was VP of Worldwide Developer Relations. And I learned I didn't want to be in the corporate world. And so I left that and kind of did some independent board work for a while. And then in the dot-com boom in '99, I was recruited into venture capital. And I've been in VC for 21 years, so long time. I'm now with Threshold Ventures as a partner. We're early stage VC, and just love what I do, love what I do. So it's, you know, it's such a fun job. You get to work with super smart people who are changing the world. And I get to work on companies like Planet, which is the largest network of satellites ever launched. We image the whole Earth landmass every day. Memphis Meats, cell-based meat, really going to try to change the world to be able to allow people to eat meat without slaughtering animals to do so. Just ended a tour of duty on a company called Zoox, which is a fully autonomous vehicle designed from the ground up, and that is now a division of Amazon. So super excited to see what Amazon's going to do with that, and just, you know, I have the best job in the world. So you know, it's been a fun journey, and I'm glad I get to keep doing it.
It is like amazing. You know, your journey is inspirational to many in the audience as well as me. So we like that's thank you for sharing that with us. Now moving on to Lila, you know, would you like to share your journey just in the technology track, like what it was like to come here as an immigrant and kind of start from scratch and work your way through school and then keep going?
Sure. I guess you're going way back. So I moved myself to the United States when I was 15, and oh my God, I didn't know any English. I didn't. I already had. I started college early in mathematics, so I had plenty of science coming in as you know, as they used to train us quite well in Soviet Union. But it was a huge culture shock for me. But you know, when you're 15, the ocean is knee deep for you. So I think it taught me actually a lot about entrepreneurship, because obviously coming from especially Soviet Union, we didn't have a lot of entrepreneurship built into us. We were very much kind of boxed in. And it was incredibly eye-opening. It was just unbelievably difficult, because from the social perspective, you have no friends, you have no network. From just really pragmatic perspective, you just have to work whatever job you can find to put yourself through, to put food on your table, and then ultimately put yourself through school. So I ended up going to Berkeley. And I put myself to school there, and I actually started my first company basically not from the dorm, but from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. We were sequencing the human genome, and it was really obvious for me, you know, looking at the alphabet soup as scientists are looking at that. And Heidi was talking about user experience. That user experience was awful, because all they were doing is they were looking at two pieces of genomes, and they were trying to align. It's actually called genomic alignment. So that they could experiment on a piece of the gene, you know, on, let's say, a mouse versus on a human being. And it was pretty obvious to me that they needed better tooling for that. And computers are great at looking at a lot of data. It's just perfect application. So we built the first genomic alignment and genomic browsing tool. And that turned out that the same technology can be applied to many different.
We were talking about Lila's journey. So Lila, if you want to
I'll pick it up. Yeah, I don't know where I stopped, but basically I started the company during when we were sequencing the human gene. That technology applied to many different areas, and the company ultimately got bought. And I was literally doing it from the lab. And then I ended up doing a ton of different roles. But what I found myself doing is really zooming in on opportunity when technology is just about ready. And what I really love doing is figuring out when it's ready for really mass adoption and how to scale it broadly and massively. And actually, I spent a little bit of time, thanks to Heidi, in the venture capital world, which was really fascinating, because it completely changed my perspective of being very oriented towards a particular industry or particular tech, into figuring out that, you know what, there there's actually patterns that apply so broadly that you can take them anywhere. And these technologies are constantly emerging, and they disrupt how we live. They disrupt businesses. They disrupt the business models, and that's what I love the most. So coming in and looking at at a just barely ready there tech for a couple of, that can, you can sell it here and there, and you can make it, you can customize it to where it's mass adoption, billions of users, or billions in revenue. That's the interesting part. How do you get it to that point as quickly as possible? And I think actually over time, if you look at the last 15 years, we really started to shrink that. And it's kind of a fascinating study. So I've applied it over the years to many different industries. And the thing that I like the best are the big kind of fundamental problems that we're dealing with as a society, as Earth. Some of the things that Heidi is investing in are some of the most interesting problems to solve, right? What ecology and climate, or autonomy, connectivity globally, right? Space. Those are the really, really interesting things that are right on the verge of being available to all of us. So that's where I focus, and that's what I love to do.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that perspective, Lila. That's really amazing. In terms of Heidi, when you take in companies, right now at Threshold, you're investing in is that earlier stage companies? What do you look for in founders? Do you think there's some secret formula for success, while picking these rocket ship startups that you take into IPO and everything?
I mean, there are a couple of key things you look for. And yes, we are a very early stage investor. We're kind of a straight down the fairway Series A. So usually writing $5 to $7 million check, and it's a handful of employees. There's an MVP, but there's not a lot there. So, I mean, the first thing we are looking for is a big TAM, a big total available market, right? This has got to be a huge opportunity. And that's the nature of the kind of deals that we play in. So things like the meat industry, a multi-trillion-dollar market; mobility, a multi-trillion-dollar market; geospatial imagery, kind of interesting because it was a nascent market, but the idea of being able to observe, the observable, queryable Earth is again, massive, massive thing. So we look for a big market. We look for why now. Why is now the time that this market is going to be disrupted? So, if you take something like autonomous vehicles and you think about the cycles of computing power that need to be available to mimic a human driver, that was probably not available. The connectivity, ubiquity of connectivity, some of the technologies around LiDAR or camera technology that we're seeing a confluence of the types of technologies that enable it to be now being the right time. And then the team is super important. Team is the most important thing. I mean, I'll take an A team in a B market over a B team in an A market anytime, because the A team will figure out how to make it an A market. And what are we looking for there? First of all, when it comes to experience, it's an interesting question, because a lot of times you're doing something so disruptive, there is no past experience, right? I mean, we're doing cell-based meat. There isn't a cell-based meat industry. So you can't just go out and pick people who did the last generation of the same thing. You have to look for people with something new. But I would say I personally look for two things in a person. The first one is a growth mindset. When you take a meeting with a person and they're sharing their idea with you, and you ask a question and they shut every question down because their idea is so perfectly formed, they don't want to have any conversation with you, that to me is a sign that that person is not interested in learning. The best entrepreneurs I know view every interaction as an opportunity to grow and learn. And every time you bring up something, they'll ask you to go deeper. They'll ask you to explain it. They'll ask you for more data. They'll tell you they'll get back to you with an answer if they don't have an answer right now. They'll open the conversation, not close the conversation. So we look for that growth mindset. And then the second thing we really look for is the tenacity, is that real sometimes you call it passion. Somebody, you know, they're very committed to solving the problem, because entrepreneurship is really hard, right? Bad things happen, it's really hard. You'll have bad days, you'll lose your financing, you'll lose your co-founder, you'll, you know, if some competitor will get, you know, $100 million from some other VC, and you've got to get up every day and keep going. And so, you know, how you figure out whether someone has tenacity is, you know, there's a lot of secret sauce to this business, which is why I think it hasn't been quantified and programmatized, right? I mean, it still is a handcrafted, human-based business, I think, because it is actually very hard to figure this stuff out. But those are some of the things we look for.
I think that's some great perspective. I mean, as a founder, you're always going to have bad days. Things are not going to be going well. And just that tenacity and persistence to like keep going and keep at it, I think that's so integral and important. Like, I was recently speaking to like one of the VCs, and he mentioned an example where he invested in this company in the early stage, giving them like 5 million or something, and it came to the point where like this idea failed, and they had like 3 million left in the bank account, and he believed in the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur actually came back and asked him, I know this failed, like, should I give you the money back? We still have like 3 million in the bank account. But this person said, you know, like, keep going, like, keep going, keep at it, and you can absolutely get it done. I believe in you. And because as a result of this company's now going to IPO, right? Like, and it's a big, like, one of their big successes. But just like picking the right person, I think is so important, right, Heidi? I think that resonates with what you just said. What about you, Lila, in terms of just your experience as a board member as well? And I know you've also been in the venture capital domain, and now from Microsoft, you'll do a lot with startups. Like, any perspectives on what you look for in startup founders?
I think that Heidi was just spot on. So growth mindset is extremely important. I actually, I couldn't decide for the longest time what I wanted to do, arts or sciences. So I did both in the beginning. And one thing that you learn when you learn art is that you cannot teach somebody something that they think they already know. So you have to approach the world with a sense of wonder and awe at everything that you see, and you have to take it in, and then you process it and you figure out how to navigate that world. So I learned that really early from actually art and not science. So I think that open mindset is really, really important. Doesn't mean that you don't have an opinion or you don't have a point of view. You have to have that. You actually have to be a little bit stubborn as well at the same time. So the second piece, to me, I would qualify it as mastery, ability to master things, not necessarily any one given thing, but a thing, right? So one thing I look for is, have people master something? It hasn't been a difficult thing, because if you look at building a company, it's no different than, let's say, in some ways, learning to, play an instrument really well, because there's the beginning, and the beginning, while it's difficult, giving birth to something, it's also, in a way, you get kind of that beginner luck, right? When you first start doing something, it's finally works, it's exciting, there is that intensity there, but then there's that huge trough of getting it to scale. And that is, oh, good God, you can have all kinds of setbacks, and it's endless, sleepless nights. And, we joke, Kevin and I joke sometimes, you end up in a hospital multiple times just because, like, panic attacks, right? What's going to happen next? And then ultimately, when you get it to that point of success, it's actually, success is fleeing. There's always the next thing that you have to get to. So that endurance, that performance endurance, that ability to drive to mastery is really, really important. And some of that, you just look at what that person has done in the past, including, have they mastered the sport? There are other things that you look for that could be a proxy for what you're going to, what they're going to have to deal with as an entrepreneur and as a founder. The third one, I do look for just raw talent. There are just people who are really good at certain things. Like if you want to, AI is going to be everywhere, right? That's a huge, existential change in tech. Some people are really good at AI. They have, amazing brains for that, and you're looking for that talent. It could also be a talent that's specific to an industry, which also really helps. So, identifying that, and, good VCs, by the way, they will track talent year after year after year. They will know where a particular student is in their, graduation class, and, Heidi can tell you more about that. We do the same also in companies as well, because we look for that similar talent there also. So those are the three things that I would say are absolutely critical.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective, Lila. I think that was really helpful to also the people in our audience here who are majorly startup founders who want to know how they can partner with you too. So I think that's really great examples.
Yeah, actually, I will, for founders and you already have that, but having that no fear is really, really important.
Yeah.
You just go, right? And you have to have that level of just fearlessness, right? Because you're going to end up with, God knows, in front of all kinds of people. At the end of the day, we're all people. Whether you're in front of a president of the country or you're in front of a really famous VC, we're all human beings at the end of the day. Don't forget that.
And I want to throw something in there because, as you said, there are a lot of founders who are tuning in, and it's all about the founders, right? I mean, the VCs are nothing without founders. So I have great empathy for founders, having been one myself for so many years. I think that sometimes founders think about VCs as, like, I use this analogy, it's like, I'm the ogre on the bridge in a video game and there's a big pile of money behind me and you have to say the magic words to unlock the ogre and then you can run away with the money. And that's not how to think about investors. The way you need to think about investors is they're going to be your partners, right? They are going to help you build your business. They are going to be there with you at thick and thin. The average arc of a venture capital investment relationship is about 7 years, which actually is about the same as the average duration of a marriage in America. And trust me, it's harder to get rid of your investors than it is to get rid of a spouse. So I've been, anyway, just trust me, it is. So you have to be really careful about who you pick. And so it's interesting to me that sometimes people want to know, well, how fast from first meeting to term sheet? Like, how quickly? And I'd argue that's almost like asking, like, how quickly can I go from first date to being married? Like, is the goal quick or is the goal to have the right partner? And so I would really encourage entrepreneurs, the goal is to understand what is going to be your financing arc. What kind of people are you going to want on your team? And when should you start building those relationships? And trust me, it's not at the moment you need the money 3 weeks from now, right? And so I think the best relationships, and I also think you have to understand, for example, venture firms, they all have very specific areas they operate in, most of them. The good ones, I would say, very specific areas. What are the sectors they're looking at? What stage do they invest in? What geographies do they invest in? And you really want to fit their sweet spots as well, because they pick those power alleys for a reason. It's because that's where they have the domain expertise, the networks, the relationships. And so one of the things, there's no shame, you might reach out to a VC and say, I'd like to meet with you about my company. And you just might not be in a sector that they invest in. If they turn you down because they say, sorry, this isn't a sector we do, or this isn't geography we do, that's good. That's like, don't waste your time on those people. Go to the ones who are going to be in your power lane. And like, for me, I'm perfectly happy in any of you. My email address is heidi@threshold.vc. You can email me and I can tell you whether that is going to be something that would be a potential fit for us or not. And if it is, and you're really early, we might say, hey, look, you're way too early for us now, but let's have a meeting because it would be nice to get to know you. And I think one of the best ways to build a relationship is to have those first conversations when you're not fundraising, because it helps you get to understand the kind of person that's sitting behind, you know, or in front of that bag of money. And it also helps us to build a relationship with you. You know, if we say to you, well, here are the 3 things we'd need to see for this to, you know, make it to Series A. And you come back to us 6 months later and you said, hey, you said those 3 things. Well, look, I've accomplished those 3 things. That helps us understand something about your ability to accomplish. And that's super important in investing, because at the end of the day, you know, it's, as I said, it's all about the entrepreneur. It's about the work you do. It's not about the work the VC does. Anytime I hear that a VC says they're working really hard on a company because they're like doing all the work, I think that's not a good sign, right? I mean, we should be in the background.
Yeah, I want to add to that. You know, I'm usually an independent director on the board, so my perspective is more. I usually try to help the entrepreneur broker the right relationship with the VC and find the right VC and think how about that relationship. I usually tell them, money is cheap, money is easy. Getting the right person on your board is very, very hard. So spend the time to get to know people. And one of the amazing things that I've learned Heidi, when you and I first I think met, the first thing that came out of your mouth, and I wasn't looking for money, I wasn't looking really for anything, is how can I help you? And those are the key words you want to hear, because the help that you're going to need, look, you will find the money. The help that you're going to need is going to be around how do you build your company? Who do you need to talk to? How do you build partnerships? How do you scale? How to deal with your marriage? Because you know what? The strain that this is going to put on your family, on your friends, is going to be enormous, right? So those are the people that you're looking for. You know, the bag of money, it's that one will come.
So true. So true.
Yeah, I think that's like, you know, really important. I've had a friend, like, I know the founder of Psycognito, he was telling me that when he like chose his board members, he spent like, before he took the money, he spent so much time just getting to know them, and he picked so wisely, and he's really happy with his board member. But he spent like even a whole weekend with his board member, just, you know, to like get to know him. And they like really bonded. And I think that's so important, to find the right like investor, because as Heidi said, like, you know, it's like the average tenure is 7 years or maybe even more. And like people do say that, yeah, the average like tenure of like you with your investors like more than the average marriage in America.
Yeah.
So
I will say, I just put a blog post up last week or the week before. It's called 6 Calls from Aisha. And Aisha Evans is the CEO of Zoox. And, you know, obviously we had a very intense relationship, particularly going through an Amazon acquisition. And I talk about sort of the archetype of the calls that I would get from Aisha. And it was interesting because some people said to me, wow, you know, some of those are, they're vulnerable and personal, right? In both directions, right? You know, calling me and telling me what I was doing wrong, or calling me and asking me what she was doing wrong. And so it's on Medium if anybody wants to read it, but I think it is a good summary. I think that what people are surprised about in it is, I think it boils down to the level of trust you have with another person. Right? Because at the end of the day, calling up your VC, who's one of the people who ultimately your board decides whether you get to keep your job or not, and say, how did I just screw this up? Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Again, it goes back to that growth mindset. It actually takes a very brave person to call the person who could, you know, who could change their career and say, please tell me how I did this wrong. But I think that willingness and ability to tap in to the people around the table who have been, you know, usually have dealt with a lot more CEOs than you as a CEO have dealt with these situations, and can be really, truly helpful to you. So I noticed there's a question on the chat. Should we approach that as about support networks?
Like, what would you suggest for a female founder trying to build support network in the Bay Area while building a new type of online shared brain for families with promising early metrics? How should we approach building our advisory board?
So great question. And I think advisory boards are super valuable. Like, so a lot of people ask me, oh, what's the difference between a board of directors and an advisory board? A board of directors is very specific. We have fiduciary obligations, we vote, we have shareholder, we have to balance shareholder considerations. There's, again, when you're a board member, you have a lot of fiduciary obligation. When you're an advisory board member, you do not, right? It's basically a relationship between the advisor and the entrepreneur, and it's sort of a mutually agreed set of work product that you're going to do, and just helping that person do whatever it is, whether it's build their team or think through tough issues or open channels or whatever it is. I think, I'll just say I am a power user of LinkedIn. I think it's a little harder in today's COVID environment in the Bay Area because there aren't a bunch of conferences, there aren't a bunch of meetups, there aren't things happening that used to be avenues for people to meet. There are a lot of online things going on. There are a lot of online things going on where you're exposed to the other people in the audience. And I would recommend participating in those with fellow entrepreneurs, with subject matter experts, with, law firms put them on and accounting firms put them on, and entrepreneur incubators and all of that. I think being an avid participant in those things and being a power LinkedIn user, if you have to pay for the, I have Sales Navigator and I use it. I sound like I'm a LinkedIn ad. Lila, Microsoft is paying me for this.
Ryan will be really happy to hear this.
Yeah. So, but I love LinkedIn. I mean, I do love LinkedIn because it really gives me access to a lot of information about people. And I believe in the cold outreach. I will say, like, my own LinkedIn is overrun, and I even say it on LinkedIn. I'm like, if you want to reach out to me, don't use LinkedIn as the medium for communication. My email address is here. Actually, I'm literally, I think, the easiest person in the world to guess my email address because I have a unique first name, last name combination. I'm pretty easy to find. So email me, please. And I gave you my email actually earlier in this thing. But my point is to build a network of advisors, really understand what you're looking for. What is it you want help with? So you pick the right people. And then you're going to have to convince them, why is it worth their time? And so do you think that person might have a passion about either you, something about you? So maybe you went to the same school, or maybe you have a similar, background. Maybe you're an immigrant from the same country. Maybe there's some connection that allows you to open up a human connection. But I think more important, does the advisor share a passion for solving the problem you're trying to solve, right? I mean, I'll take the example of Memphis Meets. A lot of our early advisors were also people who really, first of all, care about global warming, and second of all, care about animals, because, we're trying to solve a couple of really big problems with what we do with Memphis Meets, and that motivates people to be helpful. I do think you also should compensate your advisors. You can compensate them with equity, and hopefully it'll, I've been an advisor many times, and sometimes it's worked out well, and other times the equity is worth nothing. That's okay. We do this because we try to be helpful, and once in a while you get paid back for it. So I think you do have to think about it, though, is what's in it for the advisor as well. And you want them to be compelled to also be helpful to you. I don't know, Lila, what do you think? You've had many advisors in your day.
I had many advisors. I've been an advisor many times. I think you hit most of that on right on the head. I think knowing yourself and knowing what you're going to need, like literally map out what your strengths and weaknesses are and where you're going to need advice. At least it's fine if it's now and then it changes in a year or two. And then go after that. Advisors are much more, you can change it much faster, right? If you put somebody on your board, it's much slower cadence. They can advise you as well, obviously, but they also have sometimes their interest and the interest of the board and your interest can be at odds. So you don't have that tension with your advisor. So map out where your needs are, then just go into your research. There's so many great people out there. I found that people are super responsive to people asking for help. It's actually psychologically proven that the best way to make a friend is to ask for help. And then just pick, figure out who's the right person. Just don't look for one thing that's really important. Don't look for people who think like you. Look for people who don't. Because you don't need an echo chamber. People who report into you tend to echo chamber you anyway. So just because of the hierarchical nature of our species. But so pick people who are going to challenge you, who are going to potentially argue with you, who are going to disagree. This is a safe type of relationship where you can really have that, and you can really kind of spar and find your the best approach. So that group of people was really, really valuable. But finding them, I don't think it's that difficult. You just have to kind of go after that.
Yeah, thank you for those insights, Lila. I think that was really helpful. And also Heidi, thanks for those insights. What has been your biggest challenge just as an entrepreneur, any of you?
Oh, such a hard question. I mean, honestly, there's no job harder than being an entrepreneur. The highs are higher, the lows are lower. People would always say to me early in my career when I was a CEO, they're like, oh, I wish I could be a CEO. You have so much freedom. And I would think, are you kidding me? I don't have any freedom. I can't quit my job. I raised money. I walk in every morning and I look at all the cars in the parking lot and I think about the car payments and the mortgage payments and the schools and that the kids go to. And I owe it to these people to make this company, as successful as I can be, because they're, devoting their lives to making this company successful. So I do think as an entrepreneur, you have the freedom to choose, you get to choose the team, which is really important. You get to choose your investors, which is really important. You get to choose what kind of ethics and what kind of culture your company has, which is really important. So those are areas I think are super important. But I think just the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur is when you have those really bad days and it's 3 a.m. and you just had a scream fight with your CTO and you each called each other just horrible things, and you go out to your car and you sit in your car and you think, well, now what am I going to do? Because tomorrow I got to work with that person and they got to work with me and we got to ship the product. So I think the hardest thing about being the entrepreneur is getting back up on those worst days.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting perspective. Like I think people who've been entrepreneurs know that it's like a hard thing. It's like the hardest job in the world. Like you have so many responsibilities to so many people, and sometimes like before you raise money, you're also not getting a paycheck, and you're like kind of sacrificing that. But it's like so one thing I do believe is like you really have to believe in the product, the mission of the company in order to make it big. What do you think about that, Lila?
Well, I think a lot of that comes from the person. The reason that founding CEOs to me are so different from CEOs that get hired in is because they exude the culture. They can't help themselves. They don't even have to oftentimes write it down. They are culture. They are who they are, and they shape the company. The company is in itself is a reflection of who they are. So it's very different when you're a founder versus when you're not. That the challenge, I think, is self-reflection and understanding how you actually impact the company and being intentional around where you're taking it versus just kind of being carried by your, I don't know, I would call it lower cortical structure, like by your emotional brain. So I think self-awareness is a huge thing. But I would say the hardest thing is people. People are always, at the end of the day, they're going to make or break the company. They're going to make or break your board. They're going to make or break. People are all around you, and managing those, helping people, taking people on the journey with you is actually really challenging, especially as the company grows. So we are naturally, as humans, are designed to operate in kind of units. So there's a family, there's a tribe, you know, we know things, there's a thing called Dunbar number, above which we, like, just the fabric starts to break of relationships. So taking the company through these relationship challenges, I would call them, right? From the tiny little startup when it's just 2 of you, 3 of you in the garage, to a little kind of family, to, you know, 150, which is where it starts to really get shaky, to thousands of people, and still be able to carry the vision, carry the mission, and operationalize that. It's very, very difficult. So, you know, you have to have the right people. You have to have them, you know, have them all agree and get behind the same mission, the same vision, you know, and enable them all to grow and have good fights, you know, to the kind of fights that you can come back from. At the end of the day, you just have to get really good at that. And if you have that, then it's easier to pick yourself up, because you know that there's somebody out there that also believes in you. It's not just you, and maybe it's your board member, maybe it's your, you know, co-founder, but that's, you know, that's at the end of the day, that's what's going to make it possible for you to survive.
And Lila, you just brought up something so important, because I think, and you know, I teach an entrepreneurship class at Stanford. I get involved a lot of times with people, you know, they're just starting out. And you talked also about the personal growth you have to go through, right? Because I think that when you talk to an entrepreneur, and they are and almost always they're the person who's creating the product, right? Generally speaking, a lot of entrepreneurs are, especially the engineers and technologists, they're starting by being the individual contributor that creates a product. But the ones who scale the best, if you ask them 5 years in or 10 years in, what's the hardest thing you've had to do? It's almost never the product. It's, I had to learn how to manage people. I had to learn how to motivate people. I had to learn how to recruit people. I had to learn how to communicate. I had to learn how to raise money. And if you ask any entrepreneur today who started as a technologist, and they've got a, you know, as Lila said, the magical, like the 150 person company, they're not spending their time on technology anymore. They're spending their time on people. And so that's a different skill set, right? And some people grow and learn and scale, and some people do not. And so I just think any entrepreneur has to be aware that they're going to have to build that muscle mass at some point. And the sooner the better, right? And I know we're going to be out of time. So I really would, we were going to talk about diversity.
Yeah.
And I'd love to touch on that for a second, because the thing we were just talking about sparked in my mind something that I think is really important about diversity. And I'll put the headline out first, and then we can talk about it, I hope. Start early with diversity, because nature informs us that you build strength through diversity. And the biggest mistake I see entrepreneurs make in Silicon Valley is they think of diversity as an afterthought. And I think of diversity just like I think of corporate hygiene and, the right, almost running your company as if it's a public company from the very beginning. Like, don't confuse your personal checkbook with the company and things like that, because the hygiene you start with is what is going to carry you all the way through. And if you start with bad hygiene, it's like having a bad foundation under a house. And diversity, the interesting thing about diversity is if you don't build it in, if you're at 20 people and they're all the same, you've already kind of lost the battle. Because first of all, when you go interview people who are not that, they'll look around and say, well, no one looks like me here, so obviously I can't be successful. those people generally do not have as diverse networks, right? I mean, people of diversity know other people of diversity. So you're going to limit your network. You are going to create a somewhat hostile environment to people not of that, whatever that is, even when you don't intend to, because people naturally gravitate towards people they know and are like and understand. And they will build even something as simple as like what the office looks like, what the office smells like, what kind of food you serve, silly things that you think are not important, what decor is on the wall, what is acceptable, what's acceptable in terms of dress. It's weird how all that stuff will define a culture that will limit people's ability to thrive in that culture. And, you know, like at Zoox, we had an interesting thing where we didn't have a lot of diversity. And then we really wanted to increase the diversity. And so we wanted all our women engineers to be on the interview panels all the time. And one of them said to me, look, I have a job to do. Like, you are actually hurting my ability to be competitive in my job because I now have to spend 30% of my time on interview panels. So that's just like, that was a real awakening to me because I thought, wow, because we didn't focus on diversity early, we luckily more than made up for it at Zoox, which I'm very proud of, but because we didn't focus on it early, we ended up not having the right ingredients to attract more people of diversity. And so I just say, you know, do it now. Start on day one thinking about diversity.
I think that's such an interesting point and so important. Like, especially like, what do you have to say about like, just like, so Lila and me come from like STEM backgrounds where like engineering, like I did computer science, my master's as well as my bachelor's. Like I was like one of the few females in class always. What do you have to say about that? Like kind of like building that in the mindset of like people, like, because in the early days, people are looking for engineers, right? They're like not looking for other fields, they're looking for engineers and technical talent. So
Yeah, you have to go really deep actually, and you have to do that early. That is exactly right. The challenge is that the neural nets that we have in our own heads, right? They're biased. They're biased against people that we see, not against, towards people that we see in the mirror. We're naturally, if we're not cognizant of it, are going to hire people that look, speak, think exactly like us. And what does that is going to create? It's going to create a monoculture. So your first hire, think of it as the opposite of you in many ways. That's what you really want, right? Because you actually want to exercise your neural net in your own head, right? To have different ideas, to look at your product through a different lens, because otherwise you're going to build the product just for your group of people. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the market, the addressable market is big enough, but ultimately, you know, you will lose a huge percentage of the population. So your first few hires are actually critical here, right? Because they're going to give you a much wider point of view onto the world. They're going to think in ways that are going to extend or complement your own thinking. So absolutely, those first few people are critical, and then they will dig into their own, you know, networks, etc. You have to go deep. You have to look at people who are graduating. You know, the awful thing that's happening in technology, especially in computer science, is that we're actually that's the only place where we're losing female graduates as a percentage, you know, and it's declining over the years as opposed to increasing. So you have to go in, you have to go earlier in. You know, it's amazing what you see now. High school students are now, you know, doing, you know, ML programming, right? So you can go really early. You bring them in for interviews, for internships, sorry. You start kind of building that community. You go different countries, of course. Now that, especially now during this time, you know, you can have people anywhere in the world. You know, we actually went, like my team and Microsoft, we went to Africa. And it's amazing what kind of people, the team there is almost like, I think we're 80% women.
Wow.
Because education system is different, right? So the world is much flatter as a result of that. Use this to your advantage because you're going to be online all the time anyways. So those are some, you know, tricks of the trade but the end result is really important. One thing, especially, you learn this through AI a lot, because AI reproduces the bias that exists in our own, basically in our heads, right? So you start looking at what's actually happening, you start understanding, oh my God, there are gaps in how we think and who we are and our teams. All of a sudden you figure out, you're doing speech recognition, you don't understand that half of the people don't speak. And those people turned out to be diverse for some reason. Why? Right? So you start understanding all this patterns. My favorite quote is actually comes from Johnny Ives, is that the real job of the product maker is to bring out the quietest voice, because that's where best ideas oftentimes will come from. People who come up with this amazing kind of unusual things oftentimes won't say that. So how do you get them to speak up? How do you tune in and listen? That's the art form, that going back to working on yourself and learning how to bring that out of your team, how to create that team, how to create that culture. You have to do that from day one.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think it also is, I'm not saying we should have quotas. I think you should have metrics and targets and aim for them, but I don't like the idea of saying, well, we're going to, it has to be this, right? In any given role. But I do believe in, the Rooney rule, right? The idea that for every role you open, you need to go find diversity candidates, because I think a lot of times it's just people go to who they know, and they live in their own pools that often lack diversity. And if you go and just make it, I'm not saying you have to hire that person, but you have to have that person in the candidate pool. And very often you bring that person in, and because they have different ideas and they have different perspective and they have different background, they end up being the person you want to hire. So, that to me is just, if you just make that commitment, you're not even committing to hire people of diversity. You're just committing to interview people of diversity. You might be surprised by what you find out.
Yeah, and it requires a lot of work on our part. Like it requires a lot of work. Like we were talking about getting an advisory board. Think of it the same way. You go out and you look for people, and you have to spend time, whether it's interview loops or whatever, you have to actually encourage your people and reward them for finding others, for finding talent, like that. So it takes time, it takes effort. It's well worth it.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting perspective. Like diving deeper into diversity, like one of the things that came up in our previous diversity panel was about like how sometimes we as female, like certain actions of ours are just people call out as aggressive, but if males do those same actions, they are considered as leadership qualities and everyone applauds them. Have any of you faced situations like that?
Yeah, that's very common. It's and this is where having other people who advocate for you, who help you in the room speak up is really, really important. So like on my teams, if I see somebody do something like that and I don't see somebody else step up, I'll step up obviously, but I actually go after, we'll come back and I'll sit down and I'll talk to the team. It's like, why didn't anybody call it out? Why didn't anybody advocate and help this person when something like that came up? That's really important because it sets cultural norms. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's there. It's not going to go away overnight, but it's every one of our responsibilities to be there for our fellow, other women, other diverse people who are in the room with us. I actually, on purpose, I seek out, it's like part of my day is to seek out diverse people who are starting companies, who are looking for their next roles. If I identify them, it's my job to make sure that they land in a good spot, or they're helped, or they're connected. I actually spend hours on that just because I believe that's important, not just for me, but for our community, for our technical community overall.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Heidi, do you have a perspective just out of also being like one of the first female in venture capital? Like, what was it like back then?
Yeah, I mean, I again, I have a lot of, there are bad things that happen, and when you're a woman, when you're a rare thing, you stand out. And in some ways it's good, and in some ways it's bad. You know, I use some colorful language in meetings, and sometimes people are surprised that colorful language can come out of a woman, and which I always think it's kind of entertaining. You know, I like to believe that the important thing is to do a good job, right? And if you do a good job, then that stuff doesn't matter. But I also understand that, you know, you have to be successful through other people. And if they're not on your side, you're not going to be as successful. And, you know, every once in a while, a student of mine will call me and say, how do I fix this? I've come to a company where, you know, they won't listen to me and they won't whatever, and I'm mansplained to all the time and whatever. And a lot of times I say, you know, if the company culture isn't going to be conducive to your succeeding, you need to go find a different company culture. And by the way, those companies that don't allow half of the population to be successful are not going to be successful companies anyway. So you don't want to be at a company like that. So I believe, you know, it's the old be the change you want to see. But if that change ain't working, you need to go somewhere else. And, you know, I think that is, it's hard to hear that, but it's the truth.
Yeah, that's I think really great to just like, I think that diversity is definitely becoming a priority, but people should just like, you know, start to like get to know people from other like diverse cultures and just include them versus like, you know, like saying I want to hire you because you are like a woman or because you're an African American. Because like there was a founder fundraising and venture capitalists like, and it was kind of discriminatory in a way, because like the VC was telling the founder, I want to meet with you because I have to fund like a Black founder, so I'm going to meet with you because of that, which is kind of just.
I mean, look, I know we're out of time, and you know, I'll say as a closing thing is, sometimes doors open because people have to do things, right? I mean, I think after Me Too, like everybody wanted women in VC, so the doors opened. You can take advantage of stepping through that door, right? But at the end of the day, if they're not going to support you in the journey, it's not going to be successful. So I think, you know, for women in particular, we all have to make a choice of like, okay, I'll go interview for this job in part because they're saying they have to hire a woman, but I also want them, I want to be the best person for the job regardless of my gender. And I don't want to be set up to fail. And so, I mean, I think everyone has to make those decisions for themselves. But anyway, well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Does anyone want to take one last question from the audience? And then Ashim Channa will be on. He's from Greylock. I think maybe like if you'll sit on the line, I can introduce y'all to him.
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, I actually have a board meeting starting at 12 o'clock. So I do have to drop off, but thank you so much. And this has been a lot of fun. Lila, good to see you.
You too. Thank you, Aku. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. And hey, Lila, thank you so much for coming. I mean, if you want to stay on for the next 10 minutes and say hi to Ashim, I can introduce y'all. And
I'm super sorry. I have another meeting that I have to jump on to. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
I loved talking to you, and as always. So thank you so much for making it.
And you too. Bye-bye.